When Howard Stern challenged Whitney Houston to prove her vocal range without studio magic, he expected her to decline. What he got was a phone call 30 minutes later and a promise that would change everything he thought he knew about the human voice. Make it 8 octaves across 10 different genres, Howard. Madison Square Garden, December 15th. Bring your checkbook. 20 million radio listeners heard the gauntlet thrown down. America was about to witness the most impossible vocal performance in music history. November 22nd, 1995. The Howard Stern Show, K-Rock Studios, Manhattan. 7:15 a.m. EST. Coffee was getting cold as Howard leaned into his microphone, that familiar nasal New York accent cutting through the early morning static that connected him to 20 million listeners across America. Robin Quivers sat across from him, her morning show notes spread across the desk, while Fred Norris prepared sound effects and Jackie Martling scribbled jokes on napkins. They'd been discussing Whitney Houston's latest album for the past 20 minutes, dissecting every track with the kind of brutal honesty that had made Howard's show appointment listening for anyone who wanted their entertainment raw and unfiltered. "Look, I'm not saying she's not talented," Howard said, gesturing with his coffee cup. "The woman can sing. Nobody's arguing that. But this whole 8-octave range thing? Come on. That's marketing nonsense designed to sell records to people who don't understand how the human voice actually works." Robin leaned forward, always ready to challenge Howard's cynicism. "Howard, she's been saying it for years. Multiple vocal coaches have confirmed it. Why would she lie about something so easily disproven?" "Because," Howard shot back, "most people have never heard 8 octaves demonstrated live. They hear her hit some high notes in the studio, maybe catch a low note here and there, and they assume she's got this supernatural range. But studio magic, Robin. Auto-tune might not exist yet, but there are plenty of ways to enhance a voice in post-production." Fred triggered a sound effect, a cash register ding. The crew laughed, but Howard wasn't finished. "You want to know what I think? I think Whitney Houston has a beautiful voice within a normal range, maybe 5 or 6 octaves at most. The 8-octave thing is clever marketing from Arista Records to make her seem superhuman, and everyone just accepts it because she's the voice." Jackie passed a note to Howard. Howard read it and grinned. "Jackie says maybe she borrowed some octaves from Mariah Carey." More laughter from the crew. But then Howard's tone shifted, becoming more serious. "You know what? Let's make this interesting. Whitney, if you're listening, and I know you've got people who monitor this show because every celebrity does, I'm calling you out. Right here, right now. November 22nd, 1995, 7:18 a.m. Eastern Time." Robin's eyes widened. "Howard, what are you doing?" "Making a bet that's long overdue. Whitney Houston, you claim you have an 8-octave range? Prove it. Do one concert. One single live concert where you demonstrate all 8 octaves, with no studio enhancement, no backing tracks doing the heavy lifting, no tricks. Just you, a microphone, and that supposedly supernatural voice." The studio went quiet. Even for Howard, known for outrageous publicity stunts, this was bold territory. "And," Howard continued, his voice getting more confident, "if you can actually do it, if you can prove that 8-octave range is real, I will personally write a check for $1 million to any music education charity you choose." Robin leaned back in her chair. "Howard, $1 million? You're serious?" "Dead serious, Robin. This is about truth in advertising. If Whitney can back up her claims, fantastic. $1 million goes to help kids learn music. But if she can't," Howard paused for effect, "then she has to come on this show and admit that the 8-octave thing is exaggerated marketing, that she's a great singer with a normal human voice range." Fred played a dramatic orchestral sting. The phone lines lit up immediately. Listeners calling in, some defending Whitney, others supporting Howard's challenge. But Howard wasn't taking calls yet. 8 octaves, Whitney, one concert. You choose the venue, you choose the charity. Hell, you can even choose the songs. But prove it or stop claiming it. What Howard Stern didn't know was that Whitney Houston had been preparing for this challenge her entire life. Whitney didn't develop her range by accident. She developed it through obsession. Starting at age 11 when her mother, gospel legend Sissy Houston, brought her to New Hope Baptist Church in Newark, Whitney approached vocal training with the dedication of a classical pianist. 4 hours daily, 2 hours on technical exercises, scales, arpeggios, breath control, 1 hour on range extension, pushing her voice systematically higher and lower, 1 hour on emotional expression, learning to convey feeling across every note she could reach. By age 15, she was studying with classical instructors who normally worked with opera singers. They taught her the technical foundation that would support her natural gift. Proper breathing, diaphragm control, vocal placement, the difference between chest voice, head voice, and the mysterious whistle register that only a few humans could access. But the secret to Whitney's range wasn't just technical training, it was spiritual preparation. In the gospel tradition, the voice is considered a direct channel to the divine. Whitney learned to sing not just with her vocal cords, but with her entire being. Every octave was a prayer. Every note was an offering. November 22nd, 1995, 11:30 a.m. Central Time. Whitney was in her home studio in East Orange, New Jersey, when her assistant knocked on the door. "Whitney, you need to hear this. Howard Stern just challenged you on live radio?" Whitney listened to the recording of Howard's challenge. Her face remained calm, but her mind was racing. This wasn't just about proving a point. This was about defending the gift that God had given her and the decades of work she'd put into developing it. "Get me Howard Stern's studio line," she said quietly. "You're going to call him? Right now? He said I couldn't do something. I'm going to show him what preparation looks like." November 22nd, 1995, 11:45 a.m. EST. The Howard Stern Show was in the middle of a commercial break when Howard's producer burst into the studio. "Howard, you're not going to believe this." "What now?" "Whitney Houston is online too. She wants to talk to you. Now." Howard froze mid-sip of his coffee. "You're kidding." "Dead serious. She's holding." Robin's mouth fell open. Fred stopped organizing his sound effects. Jackie's pen hovered over his notepad. In 20 years of radio, celebrities didn't call Howard Stern minutes after being challenged. They sent lawyers, issued statements through publicists, or ignored him completely. But Whitney Houston wasn't most celebrities. "Put her through," Howard said, his voice suddenly stripped of its usual bravado, "and get us back on air. Now." 30 seconds later, they were live. 20 million people listening. Howard pressed the flashing button on his phone console. "This is Howard." The voice that came through the speakers was unmistakable, warm, controlled, carrying that distinctive combination of Newark Street authenticity and classical training that had made Whitney Houston the most recognizable voice in popular music. "Howard, this is Whitney." Complete silence in the studio. Howard actually looked at the phone to make sure it was real. "Whitney Houston, this is unexpected. You issued a challenge. I'm accepting." Howard's shock jock instincts kicked in, but he found himself speaking more respectfully than usual. "Just like that? No negotiation, no representatives? 8 octaves, 1 concert, $1 million to music education. That was the offer, correct?" "Yeah, but let's make it interesting." Whitney's tone shifted, gaining an edge that showed she wasn't intimidated by Howard's reputation. 8 octaves across 10 different musical genres. Not just range, versatility, gospel, pop, R&B, jazz, classical, soul, blues, country, rock, and world music. Every octave demonstrated within its proper musical context. The studio crew's collective jaw dropped. Robin actually gasped audibly. Fred forgot to trigger any sound effects. "Wait," Howard stammered. 10 genres? I just said 8 octaves. "I know what you said. I'm raising the stakes. You want to test my voice? Let's test everything. Range, technique, versatility, endurance. December 15th, Madison Square Garden. I'm already scheduled to perform there as part of my holiday tour. I'll change the entire set list." Howard was genuinely speechless for maybe the 4th time in his entire radio career. "You're serious? Madison Square Garden? 20,000 seats, 3 hours minimum. Every octave from the lowest chest voice to the highest whistle register. Every genre you can think of. You'll have front row seats, Howard. Bring your checkbook." There was a pause, then Whitney delivered the line that would be replayed on every news program in America within hours. Howard, you've spent 20 years telling people what they can't do. December 15th, you're going to learn what happens when someone spends 30 years proving they can do anything. Click. The line went dead. Whitney Houston had hung up on Howard Stern on live radio after accepting an impossible challenge and making it exponentially more difficult. Howard sat there, phone still pressed to his ear, staring at nothing. Finally, he looked at Robin. Holy shit! Did that just happen? Robin was laughing and crying simultaneously. Howard, you just got out Stern by Whitney Houston. The phones exploded. Every line in the studio lit up. Within minutes, the clip was on every news wire in America. By noon, it was international news. Howard Stern had challenged Whitney Houston to prove her 8-octave range. Whitney had responded by adding 10 genres and setting a date 1 month away. America had a countdown clock. December 15th, Madison Square Garden. The most impossible vocal performance ever attempted. December 14th, 1995. Madison Square Garden backstage. Vocal coach Patricia Wells watched Whitney's sound check and felt her understanding of human vocal capability shift fundamentally. 8 octaves across 10 genres in one night, Patricia muttered to herself. This is either going to be the greatest vocal performance in history or complete vocal suicide. Whitney, warming up at the piano, smiled. Patricia, I've been preparing for this my entire life. Every scale I practiced as a child, every breath control exercise, every hour in church learning to channel emotion through my voice. It was all for tonight. But 3 hours straight, your voice, my voice, Whitney interrupted gently, was given to me by God and developed through discipline. Tonight I'm going to show the world what both of those things together can accomplish. December 15th, 1995, 7:45 p.m. Howard Stern arrived at Madison Square Garden with Robin and his producer Gary Delabate. In his jacket pocket, a certified check for $1 million. Dated but not signed. Front row, center, directly facing the stage where Whitney would either make history or destroy her voice trying. She's really going to attempt this, Gary said, looking around at the 20,000 people filling the arena. Howard said nothing. For the first time in his career, he wasn't sure whether he wanted to win or lose the bet. By 8 p.m., Madison Square Garden was packed. 20,000 people, camera crews from MTV, VH1, Entertainment Tonight, and CNN. This would be recorded, analyzed, and debated for decades. 8:15 p.m., lights down. Whitney walked onto stage wearing a simple black dress, no elaborate costume, no distracting staging, just her, a microphone, and a piano. She looked directly at Howard Stern, smiled, and spoke into the microphone. Good evening, Madison Square Garden. Tonight's concert is going to be different. Someone recently suggested that my voice isn't everything I claim it to be. The crowd laughed, knowing exactly who she meant. Howard Stern, are you comfortable? Because we're going to be here for 3 hours, and I have 10 genres to get through. Howard waved nervously. The crowd laughed louder. Whitney moved to the piano. Let's start with where it all began. Gospel, the foundation of everything I do. She began playing the opening chords of How Great Thou Art, but this wasn't the version anyone had heard before. Whitney started in her lowest chest voice, a rich, dark tone that resonated through Madison Square Garden like distant thunder. The first octave, low F to middle F, demonstrated with the kind of spiritual depth that only comes from growing up in church. But she didn't stop there. The second verse moved into her middle range, the voice everyone knew from radio hits. Clear, powerful, precise. Octaves 2 and 3 flowing seamlessly together. The bridge reached into her upper range where most singers would stop. But Whitney kept climbing. Octave 4, then 5, her voice soaring into the rafters of Madison Square Garden with a purity that made 20,000 people hold their breath. And then something incredible happened. Whitney reached into her whistle register, that almost supernatural area where the human voice becomes something else entirely. Octaves 6, 7, and 8, notes so high they seem to exist beyond normal human capability, yet controlled with the precision of a master musician. 8 octaves, one song, genre one complete. The crowd erupted, but Whitney wasn't finished. She was just getting started. "That's gospel," she said simply. "Now let's try pop." "I Will Always Love You" followed, but arranged to showcase different aspects of her range. The opening verse demonstrated her incredible control in the middle registers, every note perfectly placed, every breath supporting the next phrase. The key changes showcased her ability to maintain power and precision while moving through different octaves seamlessly. Genre 2 complete. 8 octaves, maintain. R&B, Whitney announced, moving into greatest love of all. The melisma, those lightning-fast vocal runs that had become her signature, demonstrated not just range but technical agility across every octave. Each run was a cascade of perfectly pitched notes, covering ground that most singers couldn't reach in their entire range. Howard Stern was no longer sitting. He was standing at his seat, not cheering or celebrating, but watching with the kind of focused attention usually reserved for religious experiences. "Robin," he said, not taking his eyes off Whitney, "I think I've made a terrible mistake." "What do you mean?" "I almost prevented this. If Whitney had ignored my challenge, this performance wouldn't be happening. I almost robbed the world of this moment because of my own skepticism." Robin squeezed his arm. "But you didn't. You challenged her, and she rose to it. That's not a mistake, Howard. That's a gift." Genre 4 was jazz. Summertime, arranged to showcase Whitney's improvisational skills and technical precision. She scat-sang through complex harmonic progressions, her voice dancing through 8 octaves with the kind of musical intelligence that showed she understood not just how to hit notes, but how to make them serve the music. Classical followed. Whitney performed an aria from La Traviata, demonstrating the operatic training that had given her the technical foundation for everything else. Perfect breath control, precise intonation, and the kind of vocal placement that opera singers spend decades trying to achieve. 1 hour in, 5 genres down, 5 to go. Whitney showed no signs of vocal fatigue. If anything, her voice seemed to be getting stronger, more flexible, more expressive with each song. Genre 6 was soul, a natural woman, performed with the kind of raw emotional power that Aretha Franklin herself would have applauded. Whitney's voice carved through the arena, every note carrying the weight of personal experience and technical mastery. Blues came next. Strange Fruit, a song that demanded both vocal technique and emotional courage. Whitney's interpretation was haunting, powerful, using every octave to paint pictures of pain and hope that left 20,000 people in complete silence. "This woman," Howard whispered to Robin, tears in his eyes, "is not human. This is impossible." Country music followed. Crazy by Patsy Cline, reimagined to showcase vocal agility within a different cultural context. Whitney's voice adapted effortlessly to the genre, proving that her technical skills transcended any single musical style. Rock came next. Respect transformed into a powerhouse anthem that demonstrated Whitney's ability to belt with the best rock singers while maintaining perfect pitch and control across 8 octaves. 2.5 hours in, 9 genres complete, 20,000 people on their feet, many crying, all of them understanding they were witnessing something that would never be repeated. Whitney moved to the piano for the final genre, world music. She performed a traditional African spiritual, sung in multiple languages, demonstrating that her voice could serve any musical tradition with authenticity and power. 8 octaves, 10 genres, 3 hours of sustained excellence. When the final note faded, Madison Square Garden didn't just erupt, it exploded. 20,000 people didn't just applaud, they worshipped. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was revelation. Whitney stood center stage, not even breathing heavily, and spoke into her microphone for the first time since the opening. 10 genres, 8 octaves, 3 hours. "Howard, you still got that checkbook?" Howard Stern climbed onto the stage, his legs shaking. Whitney met him center stage. Howard pulled the check from his pocket. $1 million. He signed it with trembling hands and held it out. "I was wrong," Howard said, his voice thick with emotion. "Completely, utterly wrong. You're not just a singer, Whitney. You're a force of nature. I've never seen anything like this. I've never heard anything like this. Whitney took the check gracefully. This goes to kids who dream of making music but can't afford voice lessons. Now they can afford whatever they need. The crowd went wild, but Howard wasn't finished. I need to say something on the record, Howard announced to the arena. I've spent 20 years being a cynic, 20 years doubting people, mocking claims that seem too extraordinary to believe. But tonight, Whitney Houston reminded me that miracles are real, that dedication and talent can create things that transcend normal human capability. He turned to Whitney. I'm sorry I doubted you, and I'm grateful you proved me wrong so spectacularly. Whitney extended her hand. Howard, doubt keeps us sharp. Challenge keeps us growing. Tonight happened because you pushed me to prove what I already knew I could do. They shook hands. The handshake lasted 10 seconds, but it symbolized the moment when skepticism met genius and had to admit complete defeat. Backstage later, just the two of them, Howard asked the question that had been burning in his mind for 3 hours. How? How is any of that possible? Whitney sat at her dressing room piano, still in her performance dress, looking remarkably fresh for someone who had just performed for 3 hours straight. Started when I was 11, she said simply. 4 hours of practice every day for 24 years. Gospel foundation, classical training, constant work on breath control and range extension. No shortcuts, no magic, just work. But 8 octaves? Most singers can barely manage 5. Whitney smiled. Most singers think of their voice as limited by biology. I learned to think of my voice as unlimited by possibility. When you combine spiritual foundation with technical training and absolute dedication, you can go places that seem impossible. Howard nodded slowly. You didn't just prove your range tonight. You changed my entire perspective on what humans can achieve. Good, Whitney said. That was the point. The $1 million helps kids learn music. But changing minds? That helps everyone understand that extraordinary is possible when you're willing to work for it. The next morning, Howard's show opened with 2 hours dedicated to the previous night's concert. No jokes, no cynicism, just genuine admiration. I witnessed something last night that changed my understanding of human potential, Howard told his 20 million listeners. Whitney Houston didn't just sing for 3 hours. She redefined what the human voice can accomplish. From December 16, 1995, until Whitney's death in 2012, Howard Stern became one of her most vocal defenders. Whenever critics questioned Whitney's abilities, Howard would reference that night at Madison Square Garden. When Whitney died February 11, 2012, Howard dedicated 3 hours of his show to her memory. She didn't have to prove anything to me, Howard said, his voice breaking. But when I challenged her, she could have ignored me. Instead, she turned my skepticism into an opportunity to show the world what 24 years of discipline looks like. She took my doubt and transformed it into one of the greatest performances in music history. That night, Whitney didn't just hit 8 octaves across 10 genres. She did it with a technical precision and emotional depth that most singers can't achieve in their single best genre. For 3 hours, without a break, without a mistake, without anything less than perfection. I learned more about excellence from Whitney in one night than in 20 years of radio. She taught me that cynicism is easy, belief requires courage, and when you meet someone who has put in 8,000 hours of practice, you should shut up and prepare to have your mind blown. The concert recording, officially released in 2013 as 8 Octaves Live at Madison Square Garden, won a posthumous Grammy for Best Vocal Performance. Music schools worldwide use it as teaching material for advanced vocal students. The Whitney Houston Foundation for Children's Music Education, funded by Howard's $1 million check, has provided voice lessons and musical instruments to over 75,000 children. Many of them have gone on to professional music careers, carrying forward the technical excellence and spiritual foundation that Whitney demonstrated that December night. Today, a plaque at Madison Square Garden reads, "On this stage, Whitney Houston demonstrated 8 octaves across 10 musical genres in one night, proving that the human voice, properly trained and spiritually guided, knows no limits." The performance stands as proof that extraordinary claims sometimes come from extraordinary people who have done extraordinary work. Whitney Houston didn't just have a gift. She had a gift that she had spent decades developing into something that transcended normal human capability. So what about you? What have you convinced yourself is impossible? What gift have you left undeveloped because the work seemed too demanding? What voice, literal or metaphorical, are you not using to its full potential? If this story challenged your assumptions about what's possible with dedication, hit that subscribe button right now. Share this with someone who needs to remember that excellence requires both talent and work, and drop a comment. Tell us about a time when someone's extraordinary ability made you rethink your own limitations. Next time someone claims they can do something that seems impossible, remember December 15th, 1995. Remember Whitney Houston demonstrating 8 octaves across 10 genres for 20,000 people. Remember Howard Stern learning that the most extraordinary claims sometimes come from people who have simply outworked everyone else's imagination.